The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
It's not to say that you can't have a digital presence to be a good Christian, but because we are embodied people and bearing the image of God, we are limited to a time and space, and that is what God desires for us. And it's only in time, being rooted and embedded in a particular place, where we actually can be known and loved. And I think that's what we all want. That's what we were made for.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Katelyn Beaty is the author of Celebrities for Jesus, How Personas, Platforms, and Profits Are Hurting the Church. In a starred review, Publishers Weekly called the book a must-read for anyone invested in the fate of evangelicalism. In this episode, Katelyn and I talk about the difference between fame and celebrity, the need to challenge celebrity culture, and the importance of embodied community in an ever more digitized world. Katelyn Beaty, I'm very glad to have you on the Habit Podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So your newish book, not new book, came out in August, is that right?
2 weeks ago. So still, I think we're still in the new window.
Yeah, so not newish, it's new. Celebrities for Jesus. Tell me about this book. What's your short summary of what's happening in this book?
My short summary is that celebrity dynamics in much of the American church have been unexamined and have been detrimental to the church's witness. Mm-hmm. And so we all need to be equipped to understand how celebrity works, mm-hmm. what those dynamics look like, whether it's in our local church, in a ministry context, when we're thinking about Christian book publishing and social media influence, just being wise about those dynamics so that we can ultimately recapture a vision of ordinary faithfulness off the screen and off the stage.
Right. You say at one point, we in the church have, or at least in the American church, have mimicked celebrity culture rather than challenging it. What does challenging celebrity culture look like in a church context?
Well, some of this comes back to a responsibility of leaders or anyone with a public presence to use whatever platform they have, not to draw attention to themselves, not to use it to kind of ingratiate themselves or feed their ego, but to serve instead of be served. So some of this is a call of spiritual responsibility. Accountability is part of this as well. But I think even deeper, evangelicals, by and large, tend to be very pragmatic people.
Yeah.
We want to reach as many people as possible with the gospel using whatever tools are available to us to reach people. And there has often been a kind of naivete about how the tools themselves are shaping us or distorting the message that we're offering to people. So celebrity, I think, has been seen as a tool. Like if I have a big platform or a big following, I can use that to share the gospel with more people. But celebrity isn't a neutral tool. It shapes us and distorts the message that we're offering. If the message is about the Son of God who came not to be served, but to serve, who was not impressive or glamorous by the standards of his day, who died in such a humiliating way, who gave up power rather than hoarding it for himself or for his purposes. So celebrity has a way of distorting the messages if what we're trying to point people to is that kind of savior.
Yeah. What you convert people through is what you convert people to, perhaps. And you also point out that screens are for entertainment and for selling us stuff. And so when we see a pastor on a screen, as you said, this isn't neutral. This is, I expect to be entertained and I expect for somebody to sell me something.
Right. I mean, Neil Postman was writing about this almost 40 years ago in relation to Billy Graham in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. He talks about the rise of televangelists and calls Billy Graham, who, by the way, I like, I'm I'm not down on Billy Graham.
Yeah.
Although I don't always like the Billy Graham rule, but I'm a fan, so to speak. And also, Neil Postman said that Billy Graham showed a gross theological naivete or gross technological naivete in thinking that the tools of radio and television and newspapers were just simply neutral tools. Postman said that when you present the gospel next to The Price is Right, The Nightly News, Oprah, MTV, well, of course, that people are going to receive your gospel message as something to consume for entertainment or inspirational purposes. Absent an embodied community, which is central to what it means to be a Christian. It's central to what it means to follow Jesus. If your message is not calling people deeper into that embodied community, then there's a disconnect between your message and the core of the Christian message.
Yeah. Can you talk to me? I love the distinction you make between fame and celebrity. You say those are two things are not synonyms, or need not be synonyms anyway. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I think of fame as something that can come to someone as a result of a life well lived. It could be because of their accomplishments, their creative work, their advocacy or activism. It can be simply because you lived a virtuous life. I mean, even in the Christian story, the writer of Hebrews talks about a kind like the lineage of famous Christians who have run the race well, and we can emulate them or seek to model our lives after them. So, if fame comes to you, then the responsibility is, what do I do with this fame now that I have it? But it's something that is healthy when it is kind of unbidden and as a result of good things. Celebrity is a relatively new and modern phenomenon because it relies on the tools of mass media to project an image or a personal brand that isn't so much about your work or even your message, but is about forming a kind of falsely intimate relationship between yourself and your fans or followers. About kind of projecting or presenting an image of oneself. that inspires a kind of adoration in a way that I don't think fame necessarily does. So in that regard, celebrity is really, I think, touching on deeply existential and even spiritual dynamics of worship in a way. That's what it's inspiring in us who are fans, so to speak, in a way that fame more often than not keeps us focused on the effects of someone's life, which is healthier than the kind of attachment to an image or a persona.
So in a connected, digital world, can a person be famous and not a celebrity?
Yeah, I think so. I suppose because when we think about, I have a background in journalism and used to work in a magazine. Of course, being in a digital world means we needed to publish online, And so, if you write for a magazine or a newspaper or a website, your byline is going to be attached to your work. People might start following you. But again, the connection is to your work, ideally, the quality of your writing. If you're a journalist, maybe you've just done some big investigation into something important. People are appreciative of you uncovering some injustice or digging into something that they want to understand better. So in that way, I think you can be famous for your work in a digital world without it inspiring the kind of fandom that celebrity does. The writers and journalists I follow online, I don't feel a strangely intimate attachment to them. I just walk away and think, gosh, I'm really glad that they wrote that.
I was the example, maybe my example is instructive. I thought the famous person who was not a celebrity maybe was the pilot who landed the plane on the Hudson River years ago. But then the fact that I can't even remember his name, maybe Scully. That's right. Yeah. And so again, I don't remember his name. Don't know what he looks like. I don't know if he counts as famous or not, but he's not much of a celebrity. I mean, I don't have any sense of, like false intimacy about Scully.
Right. And I would imagine, I could be wrong about this. I'm not going to go do a deep internet dive on Scully right now, but I imagine that he has not continued to seek fame post heroic event, right? He probably got offered a book deal. There's no doubt about that. But he's not continuing to show up in the limelight to build the Scully brand, the Scully following. I'm assuming he is someone who is pretty content just going about his work of flying planes.
Yeah, right.
So I think that's a great example. Someone who is known to us, who we're talking about now because he did something amazing that saved people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I love your formulation that the right kind of fame is the byproduct of a life well lived and not a product of image management or an image well managed, I think the way you put it. So I like it. That's helpful. There's a Hebrew word that you write about in the introduction to your book. And you're going to have to help me with the pronunciation. Tzaddik, I guess, Tsaddiq, a word I wasn't familiar with. Tell me about that. It's kind of a model for the right kind of fame, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I learned this word through the work of Amy Sherman, an author who writes a lot about Christians' community engagement and pursuing shalom in their sphere of influence. And so the Tzaddik are people written about in the Old Testament who were known for being people of virtue in the public square. They were celebrated for their good works by people outside the faith because of how their presence and kind of quiet, faithful acts of goodness and service enriched other people's lives and contributed to others flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
So that image of being a presence in a place, in a community, it could be your neighborhood, your workplace, your church, whatever sphere of influence you find yourself in, believing that the integrity and quiet acts of faithfulness that you display on behalf of your neighbors really can have a diffuse effect in the world. And that, in fact, we are centrally called to focus on our embedded communities more than whatever we project in the digital world. It's not to say that you can't have a digital presence to be a good Christian, but because we are embodied people and bearing the image of God, we are limited to a time and space, and that is what God desires for us and made us to be finite in time and space. And it's only in time, being rooted and embedded in a particular place, where we actually can be known and loved. And I think that's what we all want. That's what we were made for. And what can happen with the celebrity dynamics is that celebrity can pull us away from embodied communities. There's a disembodied aspect to it that feeds a craving to be adored, to be seen as worthy, to be seen as important or special. But that's not actually good for us. It's not good for us. It's not good for us to start believing our own hype and going back to a kind of simulated presentation of the self to feed the hype. We all, in order to flourish in the way that God designed for humans to flourish, we all need to be deeply known and deeply loved in embedded community. And I think celebrity has a way of working against that and making that harder.
Yeah. Almost by definition, celebrity or even fame is to be loved by people that we can't love back.
Right. And at first that might feel really good. It might feel like love, it's kind of akin to, but we all need people who know our blind spots, our weaknesses, our growth opportunities, we might say, and still keep showing up, where their commitment to us is not contingent on how well we perform or, the flashiness of the persona we show up with. It is, I have seen you in some of your worst places and I'm still showing up because I am for you.
Yeah.
That is a transformative kind of love that the shadow of love that we might experience like on a stage when people are applauding for us can never really get to. Those people really only know us at our heights, or at our best or at our flashiest. And we all need to be known for more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Every biopic you've ever seen, and every episode of, VH1 Behind the Music was the person, coming to a point where they think all these people who adore me, if they really knew me, they wouldn't, they only love me because they don't know me. And it goes from, this is exciting. These people don't even know me and they love me, to if they did know me, they wouldn't love me.
Which is why I think it's easy to see celebrity figures as the problem. Like they're just unhealthy people or they're just shallow people or something. But I argue in the book, first of all, celebrity dynamics wouldn't exist without all of us feeding it on some level, for someone to end up on a pedestal, they need people putting them there. Yeah. But also celebrity is bad for the celebrity. It typically does not end well. I was in a conversation with someone last week who said, celebrity is not thrivable. You're saying I'm making up a word, but
yeah,
you can't thrive in that kind of intense spotlight. You can only hope to survive it. If, in more Christian terms, if God has called you to that space and you find yourself under the intense spotlight, you can only hope to survive it by God's grace, but you cannot thrive in that. And, it doesn't take long to, we just have to scratch the surface of celebrity dynamics in Hollywood or, in the music industry to see a lot of celebrities are not doing well and haven't done well because of the immense pressures of the spotlight and this profound sense that people recognize me on the street and, want to come see my newest movie and they have no knowledge of who I really am and who does really know who I am.
Yeah.
Can someone really know? Can I really show up in the world as my full self?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Somebody, one of my friends recently remarked that to not hold, when we have people that whether they're pastors or celebrities that we don't hold accountable, that's dehumanizing. To not hold somebody accountable to worship them, for that matter, is dehumanizing. And being dehumanized is not good for people.
As a general rule.
Yeah. All this, when you were to return to the idea of embodiment and the need to use our gifts in an embodied community. I don't know if you know the essay by Ron Hansen called Nebraska. He has a book called Nebraska, and one of the little stories or essays in there is called Nebraska, and it's about this little town that those of us who might drive through would never think twice about. And at one point he says, "Everyone is famous in this town, and everyone is necessary." And I love that idea that in an actual community, and of course that may be overly glorifying of small town America. I don't mean to do that, but in any community, everybody in the community is famous to the rest of the community, and everybody is necessary. I know that people who grow up in small towns say, "Oh, I wish I could just be anonymous." I wish that I wasn't recognized when I went to the grocery store. But I live in New York City, the antithesis of a small town. And of course, there's lots to commend New York City. Yeah. And there can be kind of crushing anonymity in a place this big, where you think, if I weren't here, no one would notice and no one would care. And that is why people who live here, I think especially Christians, would say, all the more do you have to be intentional about placing yourself in an embodied community, whether that's moving to a neighborhood where other people within a few blocks, or having a more intentional Christian community, or at least just showing it. It could be, I'm committing myself to go out to brunch with my friends after church, but something where the anonymity and loneliness of a place like this can be counteracted with being known and being loved. Do you know people on your block or maybe in your building, or do you just kind of not? Well, I don't. Yeah. And I'm embarrassed by that, because I write in this book about the need for flesh and blood community. I lived here for 4 years. And of course, I have friends throughout the city that I see on a regular basis. I do have a group of friends that we go out to brunch after church. And I've seen Seinfeld, so I know how it works. It's exactly like that. Okay, good. Actually, it would be really nice, shows like Seinfeld and Friends. I think, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be wonderful to have friends who live right next door to you? Yes. So I recognize the people in my building. We will say hi, and I'm sure if I needed them to
pick up my mail or go get soup for me if I were sick. That would happen. But that's something that I actively wrestle with living here.
Yeah, sure. Makes sense. Okay. I'm going to maybe change the subject a little bit. This is a podcast for people who are interested in putting creative work out into the world. Mm-hmm. And more or less by definition, you have an interest in, being an influencer, in influencing somebody through your work. Mm-hmm. I don't know that everybody who listens to this podcast is hungry for celebrity. But I think this is, I've seen at least one person on Twitter, remark to you, so are you a celebrity now that that you're promoting yourself? And I think they were teasing, but it still is an interesting question. What's the question? The question is, what is a healthy attitude toward an online presence, for instance? What's a healthy attitude toward the desire to influence without being somebody who qualifies as an influencer? That word influencer has very few positive connotations anymore.
Right. Well, going back a little bit, so I know a lot of people who are writers and artists are listening to this podcast, and anybody who is creating a body of work, whether that's an essay, a book, or a painting or an installation, whatever it is, you are creating this expressly to touch other people, to either inspire or educate or reshape the way people experience the world or experience God. The work of creativity implies an audience. It implies a dialogue, I don't know if it's the case that people in creative fields of work necessarily want to influence. I think of influence as a marketing term, which maybe gets at the tension of this. That when I encounter influencers, Christian influencers or not, on social media, I feel that the relationship is not a two-way street. It's not dialogical. It is, you are trying to, you're coming at me from a place of being on a pedestal higher up and trying to convince me or even coerce me into something, which is why it feels icky, And of course, a lot of that is tied into the commercial and business elements of influencing. But I think going back to the distinction between fame and celebrity, if you are in a creative field, what you are offering to the world, the best thing that you can offer the world is your work, not an image, not a personal brand. The attention is on the work itself. And that is going to be more transformational than just drawing attention back to yourself. So I think that might be one healthy distinction. I will say, though, that I don't know any book author who doesn't feel that they have to play the influencer game on some level, because publishers are saying, well, you need to be talking about your book on social media. You need to be reminding people about it. You can go buy it here. And we need to come up with a marketing plan 6 months in advance of the book launch to make sure that people know about it. And so I don't exactly know how to solve those tensions. I feel them internally as I am launching a book and hope that people read it. And also I am critiquing influencer culture in the book. I don't know if there is a solution to the tension, because it simply seems to be what publishers expect of authors these days.
Now, you're an editorial director. How do you I mean, I know you're saying this tension is hard. I would think it would be harder to resolve in your role as an editorial director even than as an author.
Because I have to have principles as an editorial director.
Well, and there's always the question of what's your platform? Who you're talking to.
Yeah, it is hard. It is harder as an editorial director because part of the valuation of my work is, are we acquiring and publishing books that sell?
Yeah.
So we have to consider questions of platform and reach when we are contracting books, because we want books that sell, and what sells is authors with big platforms as a general rule.
Sure.
So I think about this, and I should say I'm grateful to be part of a publishing world at Baker that, of course, looks at questions of platform, but also looks at other really important missional questions, quality of writing, timeliness of topic, originality of thought, credentialing. Does this person have credibility to write about this? Do they have, as far as we can tell, a measure of spiritual maturity to teach or talk about this? So I'm grateful to have that kind of freedom to bring more missional questions to the table. But yeah, not a week goes by that I don't receive a proposal from an author or an agent where it seems like there's more material in the proposal about the numbers attached to their social media accounts than to their actual writing. And we might even be lucky to get a writing sample.
Wow. Yeah.
So my book is definitely an attempt to be a call from within the house to return to these other missional considerations when we're thinking about publishing books that serve people. We need to look, it's not that we table the questions of platform.
Sure.
But we need to bring a lot more considerations to the table.
Yeah. When you were talking about the other considerations, credentialing and quality and originality of thought, these kind of issues, platform is a lot easier to measure than any of that. I mean, I understand the temptation for a publisher to say, you know what, these numbers on this platform feel like a more reliable way to gauge how successful this book is going to, and by successful, I mean, of course, book sales. I mean, I understand the pain of a publisher.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that a lot of publishers feel ill-equipped to take creative risks. And we just know as a general rule that numbers translate to reach, translate to sales. And we know that this works. So we're going to keep doing the thing that works. But of course, the sales can't be the only metric at play. And truthfully, Jonathan, I guess I'm just going to say this. I work in Christian book publishing. I love the books I get to work on. I believe in book publishing as an enterprise. I don't spend a lot of time reading Christian books in my spare time because a lot of those books seem to have been the result of this equation. You have a lot of followers, so surely you're equipped to write a book. So let's write the book. And even if you can't actually write, we'll make up for that weakness, through other means. And I think questions of quality, of course, but also even maybe witness to a watching world are at play. Yeah. For years, I was part of that. I provided for the Rogers family by being part of that process of helping those books that weren't good move from, let's say, really bad to mediocre. That was kind of publishable. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I ever moved anything from really bad to really good. And
I was just did a lot of rewrite editing, and it didn't. That kind of takes it out of you. There weren't a ton of those books that I thought, I'm really glad I helped put that book in the world. I was glad that I could pay my mortgage. My family had a place to live for another month, but that's. I was glad to get out of that business.
That there was something demoralizing about the lack of quality that you were seeing in the manuscripts you were being asked to transform into something publishable.
Yeah. But there were one or two books that I thought, I'm really glad, this was a person that really had something to say and couldn't get it out. And I was really glad to help them. But that was the exception rather than the rule in that world.
Right.
Well, I'm glad I mentioned before we started recording that I like what you're doing at Brazos Press. I'm glad you're publishing books with originality of thought and that have good big ideas. And so I'm glad that you're not only paying attention to platform. And so I urge you to keep fighting the good fight as far as that goes. And I know it's, like I said, I understand why publishers do what they do. I can't quite approve of them, but
right. But you understand the pressures and the fact that, businesses want to create a profit.
Yeah. Can we return just real quickly to this idea of, you really pushed back on the idea of being an influencer. And I know that's an ugly word. Like it was almost invented that, to be used as a cudgel. And yet, you said you don't want to be an influencer, you want to enter into a dialogue. But the truth is, the person who writes the book, it's not an equal dialogue, right? You are the person who writes the. I hope you are hoping to influence people through Celebrities for Jesus.
I guess I feel more comfortable with the phrase "shape hearts and minds."
Okay.
Which is a Christianese phrase that allows us to prevent saying influencer. Yes, of course. The reason I wrote the book and the thing that helped me to keep writing the book when I didn't want to write anymore was I believe that people will benefit from hearing this. This will shape how they imagine Christian life and faithfulness in the contemporary world. I guess thought leadership could be another Christianese phrase.
Is that better than influencer? I'm not sure it is. No, go ahead. You're about to say something. I want to hear it.
Yeah, I wonder if I'm more comfortable with those terms because influence is more subtle. It implies a kind of subtler power. And I am more comfortable when power dynamics are overt and obvious rather than presenting as something that they're not, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Can you tell me about some of the dialogue that your book has generated over the last, I know it's only been a couple of weeks since it published, but I know now. I thought it had been out a little bit longer, but.
Yeah, well, I have been pleasantly surprised by how many people have said, I read this in one sitting. And my mom was the first to say that, but even beyond my mom, there were apparently people who found it a compelling read. That is really great to hear just from a writer's perspective.
And by the way, you should even be glad your mom read it because not everybody's mom reads.
Really?
Flannery O'Connor's mom didn't read her books. She said she gave her book to her mom to read and she found her asleep on page 9.
Well, I think Flannery found some other fans to make up for the dearth of the family support.
She was an influencer.
So yeah, many people have said, I read this in one sitting. Thank you for helping me to articulate something that I had intuited but couldn't put my finger on. That really speaks to what I think of as my primary role as a writer. Not all writers think of their writing like this, but I want to help make complex things clear, and give people language to understand and identify something complex. So that has been great. I've had, the book focuses primarily on the evangelical world and movement because that's the world that I know the best. It's the world that I grew up in. And I worked at the quote unquote evangelical flagship magazine for almost a decade, where a lot of these stories of fallen Christian leaders were coming to light. I've had some people say, this is a dynamic in the Catholic world, which is very interesting to me. This can be a dynamic this isn't just the non-denominational megachurch world. It also can crop up in more mainline, kind of traditionally hierarchical church communities as well. So it's been interesting to hear people apply the broad themes of the book to their own particular church context. I've had people say, these dynamics can happen in small churches as well, which I think is really true and apt. And I just tended to focus on the big churches because that's where a lot of the most egregious stories have come out of, in the last several years. I've been encouraged by people who were personally touched by the final chapter on ordinary faithfulness, that there is a kind of message of empowerment for lay Christians in the book. And then, of course, I've had people say, you can't write on this. You're a celebrity. Isn't this ironic? Or aren't you speaking out of two sides of your mouth? And truthfully, I don't think of myself as a celebrity, but I anticipated that kind of pushback from the beginning. So,
And I guess you just respond, no, I've lived a life of virtue, and this fame has been a byproduct of. Has anybody gotten their feelings hurt? Has anybody said you're being ugly?
Not yet.
Yeah.
But it's been an interesting dynamic to wade through, because I do name names in the book because I feel that I have to as a journalist. I don't want to talk about broad trends. I feel like we need to be talking specifically as much as possible without making it personally punitive or mean, right? I do think that there is, somebody commented, I think of her as a celebrity. She is friends with people in this Christian celebrity orbit. She said, I don't trust this book because it relies on journalists and we don't trust journalists. I don't trust journalists. Like, well, I don't know how to reach you, but there might be some barriers there. I did have an agent who represents many Christian celebrities ask for a copy of the book. I think he was concerned that maybe I was writing about some of his clients.
Yeah.
So we sent him a copy. I haven't heard anything back, but
okay. Well, but I know we need to wrap this up. But one of the alarming things to me about some of the stories you told is realizing that in your distinction between fame and celebrity, there were stories of people who, for whom fame was a byproduct of a virtuous life, of doing good things. And then that somehow metastasized into a toxic sort of celebrity. And I don't, so any of you famous people who are listening, be careful.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think in a lot of stories of these kind of the most public stories of fallen Christian leaders, I genuinely believe that in a lot of those cases, the person who ended up falling or hurting a lot of people started with really good motives. And perhaps they found success at too young an age, or kind of at a time where they didn't have the internal grounding and resources to properly manage the fame that came to them, that they were implicitly and explicitly told by the people around them that actually we want to fuel your celebrity status as well, because it's good for the church, because it aids in our growth. It makes us look successful. We believe that God is part of the success. So we want to be part of what God is doing. We can't stop the train because the train is moving really quickly and it's moving towards something exciting for all of us. So we don't want to curtail any of this. I think it can start with really good motives and then become something big and unwieldy and damaging. And you don't even realize until you're out of it and looking back, oh, I helped perpetuate this too because of the way that I treated or thought of the central figure.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask you one last question. That is, who are the writers who make you want to write?
Well, I just said I don't really read Christian books.
Okay.
So, gosh, I really like, when I think about good journalistic kind of writing, Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, kind of the origin of the true crime genre, at least in book form, and his ability to tell like a journalistic account of something that really happened, but have it read like a novel is just an incredible feat of journalistic work. I think about Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohy, who are investigative reporters at the New York Times, who broke the Harvey Weinstein story back in 2018 and went on to write a book, basically a book about how they told that story, called She Said, that I just think is an incredible piece of investigative journalism. On the fiction side, I mean, you mentioned Flannery O'Connor. I love her collection of short stories. I'm a big Lord of the Rings. Well, when I say big, that's all relative because I haven't read the Silmarillion. So so I'm probably not a big Tolkien fan, but I mean, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is, top 3 books of all time. And on this topic, just an incredible imaginative take on the temptations of power and how power corrupts. I like George Saunders. He's like a very quirky contemporary writer who I think has a new collection of short stories coming out this fall. So those are some writers who inspire me and who I am not even close to in terms of writerly skill, but who make me want to keep writing. Yeah.
Have you seen George Saunders' book about fiction writing, Swimming a Pond in the Rain? Oh, it's so good. So he walks the reader through 7 stories by Russian fiction writers and says, here's how they did it. It's really good. So if you have any interest in fiction writing, you need to check that out. It's a great book.
And what is the name of it?
It's called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain.
A Swim in a Pond in the Rain.
Yep. That's great.
Nice.
All right, Katelyn, Beaty, thank you so much for being here. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for having me.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. To check out more of our podcasts, visit rabbitroom.com/podcast. Our work at The Rabbit Room would be impossible without the generous support of our membership. If you'd like to learn more about membership at The Rabbit Room, visit rabbitroom.com/member. And thanks for listening.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community. funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.